I think as biologists and in general as humans, we think we understand DNA, but we actually don't understand DNA. And that's what scares me because DNA is such a fundamental molecule to life, basically. And to not understand the nature and the purpose of DNA and start playing with it all over the world without actually understanding it well enough and respecting it well enough might be dangerous.
Hola, Karl.
What's up, Erum?
Doing well. Doing well.
So I'm excited for this podcast today, but I do have a note that I wanted to tell you. As Kristen, my wife, was leaving to school this morning, she said she was listening to our podcast with Cass, and she asked me some questions about it. So we have some people who've been listening regularly, including Kristen.
Nice. That's good. What question did she have?
She was just asking about where Cass was from and where our friend Kristen Ellis was from, since they're both from southern states.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was a great episode. Cass is a very creative guy.
Right.
And the whole concept of dreaming biology really got me thinking. And I actually had a dream in biology.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Right now, I am in Porto, Portugal, and it's beautiful here. And they had these stone structures that kind of look like mushrooms. They're about like the size of a dorm refrigerator. And I was like, those are cool. I'm like, what if they were actual mushrooms rather than a stone structure? And then I had a dream. There were these giant mushrooms. The width was about 12 feet and they acted more like umbrellas. So when it rained, you can go under the mushroom and seek refuge from the rain. So I had these dreams of these giant mushrooms. I woke up, I'm like, oh, I just dreamt in biology. I'm thinking can mushrooms be engineered to be that big?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. You may not know this, but in Minecraft, there is one of the biomes in Minecraft has these humongous mushrooms. There's a lot of the biomes, there's small mushrooms that you can pick up and make soup from, but there's one dark wood forest biome that has these gigantic mushrooms that when you take your self-made axe and cut them down, you end up getting with a bunch of little mushrooms that you can turn into soup. There might be other things you can do with it, but that's what I know. One of the biggest organisms in the world is a fungus, and it's this multi-mile living, I think it's more underground than it is above ground in Oregon. But since we're talking about mushrooms, I think it's a perfect introduction to this interview that we're doing with Axel of Polybion. Polybion is a company that's making bacterial nanocellulose biomaterials. Their first material is a leather substitute, but many of the other companies that they compete against are using mycelium to produce a leather substitute.
Yeah, that's amazing. Polybion, they are brother co-founders. We are interviewing Axel for this episode. This is part 1 of Polybion episode, and we'll be interviewing Alexis in part 2 for the next episode.
Yeah, so I think instead of spending a lot of time explaining who Polybion is and what they do, we'll just get right into the interview and talk to Axel about it.
Sounds good.
Axel, thanks for joining Erum and I. We're super excited to have you here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the origin of Polybion? What inspired you to start the company?
I grew up in central Mexico, surrounded by both nature, science, and entrepreneurship. Mexico is one of the most biodiverse countries on the planet, so there's a lot of diversity both in cultures and foods, in nature. And also my parents, they are both biologists in a sense. My mom's a chemist, focusing clinical testing, like blood testing and all that. She owns a lab. I grew up playing with test tubes and syringes and all that stuff. My dad's a biochemist. So I think that helped a lot that they taught me about science, but my dad also founded a company when he was young. When I was growing up, I used to read a lot about climate change and how it was like a dystopian future in which climate could change and this would be very bad for humans overall because it would change the economy. And since I was young, I thought that was going to be a problem that we would need to solve in this lifetime. And I think this has come earlier than everybody thought. Climate change now is a reality. It's not a future thing. Right now it's happening. We're experiencing it, feeling it as the planet warms up and different things change. But also, I remember reading about biomimicry. I read a book that planted a seed in my brain about solving these very hard problems to solve using nature, because nature has already solved all these problems. This planet has endured many ice ages and many heating episodes and 4 or 5 mass extinctions. By mimicking what nature has already learned through millions and millions of years of trial and error, I thought we could solve this problem. That's why I started Biotech, and during my bachelor, I participated in iGEM, which is a competition about genetic engineering. And when I was at IGEM at MIT, I was listening to Cornell's team keynote, and they were working already back then in 2013 to modify the mushrooms they were using. So I had read prior to that about mushroom materials, but I had never seen them. And they passed a piece of mushroom material, and when I touched that material, I knew that I needed to grow them. And that's how it all started. I went back to Mexico, and also it coincided that during that time, I had been talking to Alexis, who is my older brother and my co-founder, about doing a biotech startup. And we knew we wanted to do biomaterials. We didn't know exactly which biomaterial. We just knew that we wanted to do this because it sounded like it could actually help mitigate climate change, like growing your materials. And that's why we started with the mushroom material, because we had 2 or 3 options, like chitosan, chitin bioplastic from crab shells, and also the mushroom. I thought that the other one was more of a chemistry process, and this one was a bio process. So I thought it was a great way to start. Also, interestingly enough, when we started, we actually contacted Ecovative. I wrote them an email back then because I wanted to license their technology. And since they ignored me, then I decided to develop it myself. So that's how it started.
Let's fast forward. Talk about where you guys are now. You started 7 or 8 years ago, and you've made some tremendous progress.
Yeah, so the last year we've been working a lot into building this plant I'm sitting right now in, which is the first biomanufacturing plant for bacterial cellulose at scale in the world for textile applications.
Here's the definition for nanocellulose. Cellulose is an organic compound that's an important structural component of cell walls of green plants and many kinds of algae. It's one of the scaffolds that holds the outside of cell walls together. Commercially, cellulose is used to produce paper and cardboard. Nanocellulose refers to nanostructured cellulose. When Axel of Polybion talks about nanocellulose, he's talking about nanocellulose produced by bacteria. This is a super interesting, super important biomaterial that we'll be looking at in further episodes of Grow Everything.
We've been focusing on scaling this process so that we can output millions of square foot per year of this material and actually start to make a dent into actual leather numbers, because this market is so huge that even by producing millions of square foot, you are not producing even 0.1% of global leather demand. So we've been working nonstop on that, on scaling the process, standardizing it, safety, the standard operating procedures so that every batch is the same. We control quality, we do mechanical testing and material testing, keep developing this and also inputting into this industrial environment.
You just mentioned the size of the market. Even producing millions of square feet, you barely put a dent. How big is that market? Is it the biomaterials market? Is it the leather market? What market are you talking about?
I'm talking about the leather market, which is about $200 billion in terms of square foot. Even if you produce, let's say, 10 million square foot per year, that's not even 0.1% of the global demand.
You've been showing off your biomaterial or your first product, Cellium, which looks a lot like a leather product. And one of the things that I've noticed is that you show a lot of these materials with colors. Can you talk about the material itself and then how do you get the colors produced?
Yeah, it's a bacterial cellulose nanomatrix. Other synonyms for that name is biocellulose, nanocellulose, bionanocellulose, microbial cellulose. Those are the same, which it's a nanoscopic thread of cellulose that is different from plant cellulose, for example, because plant cellulose, just to give you a small idea, is about 50 micron thick in diameter, the thread, versus 50 nanometer in diameter, the thread for bacterial cellulose. So it's a 1,000 times smaller, the thread. So this is like a nanoscopic non-woven. So it's like nanoscopic threads that get intertwined and they create this non-woven material, you may say. But in the macro scale, it looks like a fleshy material, like a hydrogel. And this is basically a matrix, a nanostructured threads. And this matrix, then we treat it with a specific sustainable formula that stabilizes the matrix so that it prevents decay, but also we can add in there the color, the smell, the texture, very similar to tanning animal leather without the heavy metals and the toxic stuff. And in that process, we can add the color. The interesting thing is that the material we get after that, the final product, the leather, has a very unique look to it because it's a new commodity. It doesn't look like animal leather. It doesn't look like mycelium. It doesn't look like plastic. It looks like its own material, which is bacterial cellulose. Every canvas is unique because Every growth process is unique, just like you and me. Those canvases, everyone is unique, and every product you make with it will be unique. Every shoe, every handbag. There's another possibility that can be explored in which we could actually add the color to the growth media so that it grows with color. That's also a possibility we've been exploring. Commercially, we still do the tanning because it's important to understand the existing industry. There is a existing leather industry that is composed by many players that do different steps of the supply chain. And one step of the supply chain in terms of customization is the actual retanning, which is where they add the color and the texture and the smell to the leather to make, let's say, a handbag. And some brands, like ultra luxury brands, like to do it themselves. They don't like somebody else to add the color for them because they want to control that process. In order to actually have a solution that is plug and play for the existing industry, then we need to keep doing the coloring at the stabilization level and not at the growth level. But this could be combined in the future. Let's say grow it with a specific pre-color, let's say, and then retan it as it's done with animal leather. And there's even other possibilities in the future with genetic engineering and synthetic biology. We could start growing color so that it grows as it assembles the matrix. It also secretes the color.
Besides the color possibility, how would that change the characteristics of the material?
What will change? Well, basically everything. We can change color, as I said, but we can actually change the nature of the material. So it will not be cellulose anymore. It will be maybe something else. It's like comparing a tiger to a lion. So if you change the name, everything changes, basically.
Yeah, I guess you probably have thought about this a lot, but like in your dream scenario, what are some functionality of the fabric that you're really interested in seeing? Like, what is a possibility here?
Yeah, the final frontier, let's say, in the leather space, because there are other frontiers broader, like Mars and other stuff. But the final frontier in leather, the way I see it is we want to grow a material that is like the utopian leather, meaning it can be grown locally from waste in any geography of the planet or in other planets. It is better performing than animal leather, so it outperforms animal leather in all aspects, waterproofness, in strength, in flexion, in abrasion, in everything, basically. Then at the end of the life cycle, that's a very important part, end of the life cycle, I'll go back to that. It can be compostable, home compostable, not industrially, but in your garden or in a pot or wherever. In order to do that, it's with genetic engineering. The only way to do it is by creating what we call a meta material. So a material you've never seen before that combines two materials that naturally occur in nature, but not combined. We see it as a palette, as making a painting, right? Nature gives us this palette of materials which are very different, and by combining them we create new colors, meaning new materials that you've never seen before that can fulfill this promise. If we're able to do that, then we can disrupt the whole industry because we can grow leather wherever you need it with waste. It can be custom made, grown to the specification of the application. It can be grown into the shape. It can be grown onto textiles or onto other stuff. And then at the end of the life cycle, and that's what I was saying, the end of the life cycle, that means only when you want it to decompose. It doesn't mean that it will automatically decompose, let's say, your feet, but it will decompose only when it reaches the soil and water, which is what you need for bacteria in the soil to eat the material.
Axel mentioned the size of the leather market earlier. To be clear, the size of the leather market is enormous. It is expected to reach $745 billion by 2030. A big chunk of this comes from footwear, with Nike and Adidas leading the pack. But other leather accessories like handbags and car seating systems are also contenders.
With the material that you guys have already created, which is very impressive, what has been the reaction from industry?
We're very excited, very happy that they agree with us that this is a very good looking material. If you compare this to the first material we output in the beginning, you had to have a lot of imagination to think that material could become a leather substitute, right? But right now, you don't need that much imagination. It looks very similar to leather. It performs very similar. It even smells like leather. Yeah, right now, all brands agree that this is a very promising material that they all want to start testing. And we're working with top brands in different industries, such as sportswear, handbags, watches, cars. I think we are all very excited to see how this material can perform in different applications. But the first trials that we have done, we already did some testing with different partners, and all the brands seem to agree that this has no issues. It can be used effectively compared to plastic or animal leather. And also we are targeting to work with brands that are visionary enough so that they understand that this is not plastic, this is not animal, this is a whole new category of its own. And thus, we will need to understand where it will work best. Meaning, for example, in a car, maybe not, right now it's not ready for making a seat, but maybe it's ready for a dashboard, let's say, to understand on which part of the product it will be used under which circumstances and what volumes because of the price.
What's the impact that the leather industry has on the planet?
The leather industry is directly tied to the meat industry. We already know how devastating cows are, like the cow problem, we call it, because we cannot dissociate meat from leather because leather is a waste material from the meat industry. But also the good news here is that the meat industry has been revolutionized recently with all these alternative protein companies. So they go hand in hand with alternative leathers. Industrial farming is the number one deforestation cost in the world. So we kill jungles and forests to substitute them with grass and cows so that we can feed our meat and leather demand. So this is a very important concern to solve the cow problem. In terms of water, for example, for every square foot of leather, you need around 2,000 liters of water. So that is a significant amount of water compared to 4 liters that you would need to create 1 square foot of cellulose. So this solution definitely, it's orders of magnitude more sustainable than traditional materials, not only in the water use, but the land use, the eutrophication of water, and the carbon footprint. Recently, we did an LCA with a student from ETH in Zurich that we will release hopefully soon to the public, in which you can assess the leap that we did in terms of sustainability with this material. And this stems from the fact that this is grown from waste. This is the main fact or contributor to its sustainability footprint. This material can even be negative, can have a negative footprint, which is a great alternative because no other materials have a negative footprint, not even mycelium. And this stems from the fact of the waste we're using. This was designed on the process since day one because we knew that in order to actually create a difference, we need to think differently. We thought that it was nonsense to grow these materials from food like sugar. So that's why we started working on growing from waste, which is not very easy. We had to solve a lot of problems to do that. But now that we did, then it comes out with a very good performance in terms of sustainability. It can even, as I said, have a negative footprint because this waste will otherwise go to landfill.
That's amazing. Can you mention what waste material are you currently using? And then 2, if you were to produce another facility, as I would imagine you're thinking about, do you need the same kind of waste or can you have modified the inputs?
Yeah, the good thing about biology is that it's very versatile, right? So the best analogy is thinking of a diet for a human. So you can feed a human with fish or with beef or with vegetables or vegetarian, and the human will be perfectly fine and healthy. The same with bacteria. You can feed them different things. In that sense, right now we have tried at least 3 different waste streams, different food wastes that are equally usable and have no significant impact on quality and output. But this can be adjusted to any waste that's available in different geographies all over the world. Just to give you an idea on volumes, we did a small calculation using the amount of waste of one specific waste stream that is thrown away in Mexico every year. And if we were to convert that waste into cellulose, we would output about 50% of the world leather supply. So there's more than enough waste in the world to supply not only 100% of the leather supply, but other industries such as paper and pulp or organs or advanced materials. So the good thing is that we, or the bad news, however you want to see it, is like as humans, we're very wasteful. 1/3 of the food we grow, we throw it into the trash. So this food could feed the bacteria, right? So all this waste can be reused, repurposed, and refunneled into a bioprocess in which bacteria extract the food out of that waste and then in turn grow different materials. So the numbers add up. There's enough waste to supply many industries with their needs of material.
And your facility is circular/sustainable. Why did you guys build that kind of facility and what is it that makes it a circular facility?
Yeah, we believe in being coherent in what we do. The reason this facility is solar powered and reuses water and we recycle all the trash we generate, we make a lot of efforts in making this a new model of operation for facilities. Like we want to reinvent the manufacturing facility. And it involves our best co-workers, which are living cells, bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms, because they work nonstop 24 hours a day. It is completely solar powered. sustainable, the water is reused. And we did this because basically we believe in things have a soul, right? And in order to have a soul, it needs to be coherent, it needs to breathe, it needs to be alive. And in order to do that, it needs to be sustainable. We hope that this can be a model for the future for all biofacilities to run like this, basically a zero emission operation, what's intended or negative.
Right. Describe where the location of the facility is and what are the advantages of the location.
So we are located in central Mexico. This is a state called Guanajuato, and this is the geographical center of Mexico, right in the center. It's a very interesting mixture of things going on in here. For example, it's a logistic hub because we are, as I said, in the center of Mexico, in which you can drive, let's say, 5 or 6 hours east to go to a port, to Veracruz, to go to Europe. And you can drive the same amount of time going west to go to the Pacific, to Asia. And you can drive 10 hours north and be in the US. So you have access to three of the biggest, or the three biggest markets in the world. The biggest one, 10 hours north, in one geographical place that also has a lot of other things going on. For example, this is a very important agricultural area. In the last 20 years, there's an automotive industry that has been moving here. The whole Detroit moved here, and some Japanese manufacturers too. We have 5 OEMs that encompass 4 states in central Mexico, this one and the other 3 that are around it. And this is the biggest automotive hub in the world because there's not only the OEMs, but the tier 1, the tier 2, the tier 3 for all the manufacturing of cars. And also in this area, there's a very big, important biotech center where they sequence corn genome, the avocado genome. And this center 30 years ago was one of the pioneers in creating GMOs for plants. So the system that utilizes a bacteria to infect plants to transfer DNA was co-developed in this center in this city in central Mexico. Also, there's a leather hub in here that is very important for Latin America, that one of the 2 biggest in Latin America, one in Brazil, the other one here. And so all this make for a great soup to create a biotech hub. And that's what we foresaw when we started, but we didn't know that it was going to be such a great feat to do this here, because it makes so much sense, because you have everything you need to reinvent leather here.
That's fantastic. And then what's it been like for you guys? You mentioned this scientific facility where they sequenced corn and created the tools for inserting genes, but what's it like for you guys to recruit scientists and engineers?
Yeah, that's one of the great things. For example, these centers, we have access to great scientists, PhDs, masters in plant and microbial engineering, genetic engineering, biologists, microbiologists, biochemists. And so it hasn't been that challenging for us because of that. This makes for a very efficient operation that we can compete with any other operation in the world in terms of talent acquisition. It's a great feat, both geographically and in terms of timing. We believe that this could become a very important bifurcation hub in the world.
Interesting. When you think in the future, let's just say 5-10 years ahead, what does Polybion look like?
Polybion wants to become a beacon for sustainability in the biofabrication space of materials. As I said before, we are actually in it for the planet. Like, the reason we started this was to help our planet and to help ourselves, our civilization, because, as I like to say, the planet will be fine. The only ones that are at risk is us humans. Or as Karl Sagan used to say, we need to save us from ourselves. So how I see Polybion as a beacon for sustainability. That's why we're building this facility, that we wanted to become a model for manufacturing of materials and biofabrication. And we see it as a leader in biomaterials in the future that can be competitive both in cost and in volumes compared to traditional materials, so that we can actually have an impact through scale. And yeah, we see it as a synthetic biology based company that can continually deliver improvements on new materials, on new industries, and basically create solutions for a plethora of applications in different industries for materials.
That's fantastic. How do you think biomaterials will evolve over the next 3 to 10 years?
So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we will see biomaterials to start being used commercially in very specific industries such as fashion, shoe, and accessories. And for very small volume collections, let's say 10,000 pairs, 100,000 bags, which might seem a lot, but it's nothing compared to the volumes that brands actually produce. In the next then 10 years, I think we will see massive adoption of biomaterials across these same industries, but also maybe automotive, which maybe we will reach 20% market share in the next 10 years. And then after 30 years, I would think that these will become a standard. Biomaterials will be used widespread across different industries, and they will reach more than 80% market share, and they will become like horses and cars. Like cars now are widespread and people still use horses in some places, but cars are used more. And that will also happen in parallel with meat. I think in the next, after 30 years, humans, maybe we will laugh at people eating or killing animals for their meat or eating animal meat. We will eat meat that are all grown meats and sustainable. And the same with leather and with other materials that come from animals, but also other materials that don't come from animals.
When you think about the biotech industry as a whole, what do you see as being application or a challenge that you worry about?
I think as biologists and in general as humans, we tend to go all the way into things without actually understanding them. And the thing I'm trying to say here is that we think we understand DNA, but we actually don't understand DNA. And that's what scares me, because DNA is such a fundamental to life, and to not understand the nature and the purpose of DNA and start playing with it all over the world without actually understanding it well enough and respecting it well enough might be dangerous. So that's what scares me. And I think that we need to do this very carefully with a lot of respect and understanding that we don't actually understand DNA. That's the way it should be done, because that way we can be very careful and do a very controlled way, and people that are actually certified to actually do this engineering, because otherwise we could face a dystopian future such as what we just saw with the pandemic, but even broader and worse.
And when you think about companies that are in the space that are producing products, what are the companies that stand out for you that you admire and why?
So yeah, Ecovative, I think I've mentioned them before. I admire them because first, they're great engineers. I respect good engineers. Also, they invented this industry the way I see it, because there were other startups trying to do that, but never actually scaled. So I think the fact that they were able to scale first says something about them. This reflects in Polybion. What we believe also is that we like to do things our way. We like to lead through example and trying things differently. Talking about sustainability without scale doesn't work. Impact requires scale. As we're building this industry, because this is a new industry that is born, and we need to create the industry. And in order to do that, we need to work together and to play to our strength. Everybody has their own particular strength, and that's why we think this should be cooperation more than competition. This is part of the new economy, again, like the capitalism 2.0, which is circular, which is not based on competition but on collaboration, which there's a freedom of information, sharing information, just like Tesla did with their patents. I think this is crucial to becoming one civilization as humanity, and to, again, save us from ourselves.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. When you think about your younger self or someone who's getting ready to start a company, what advice do you have for that founder?
There are many advices, but one is that it requires an army. You need to create a great team. It's going to take longer than you think. So the faster you start, the easier or the faster you will finish. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. The catchy phrase everybody tells you, but it is true. Specifically for biotech startups, do not outsource your core technology, because some people try to do that and that doesn't work. Because if you're building a new process, a new industry, and a new company that you don't know how it works, you need to understand every step of the way and understand how that impacts volume, quality, and the overall process. And if you outsource the core tech, then you are not understanding it because somebody else is doing it and learning all that. So you need to get your hands dirty, get into the process, do all the process yourself so you understand and foresee every step of the process where you will have a problem in scale. And also think ahead of scale, because you need to design processes from the lab thinking about scale. So for example, if you want to try a specific raw material that works great in the lab, but it costs $1 million per kilo, then it's not scalable. Or a raw material that comes from animals, even though it can be great for performance, you cannot use it at scale because then you're not solving any problem. So you need to think ahead of scale in everything you do, so that in the lab, when you're testing things, there are things that actually can be scaled and that work at scale.
So to close this out, do you have any favorite biotech book or movie that you would recommend to any of our listeners?
Yeah, I read a book that actually one of my mentors recommended it to me, called Cosmos by Lynn Margulis, who is a very respected biologist who proposed the endosymbioses theory, which is the theory that explains how very simple prokaryotic cells or bacterial cells created complex cells like us by creating a community of bacterial cells that created these complex cells that are eukaryotes or us or plants, animals, fungi. It basically tells you about how everything is interconnected and how for every macrocosmos, there's a microcosmos. So just how the planets, for example, ellipse around the sun, just electrons also do that in a smaller scale. And cells also work like this. They are all holograms of the bigger structure. So in that sense, that's very interesting to understand how actually biology works and cells, and the fact that the human body has more bacterial cells in it than human cells. So we are more a collection of bacteria than of humans cells. So that tells you something about life on this planet, where it originated, and why bacteria and archaea are so important for this, even more important than eukaryotes like plants, animals, fungi, us. I think this is the planet of bacteria. There are more bacterial mass than any other kingdom of life. So they are very important for the planet in cycling water, oxygen, nitrogen, and everything else, but also for us, because you know the recent discoveries of the microbiota in your stomach, how it affects your brain and it affects your digestion and your health, and how this will be fundamentally important for the future of humanity.
Yeah, I also remember you had said early on that it doesn't really matter where you are because biology is everywhere and innovation can happen everywhere. So what do you think the relationship should be between big cities like New York and, say, a smaller city, and the relationship to biotech? What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I remember that conversation we had. And the argument I did was the following. The past revolution, which was the IT revolution, the computer chips revolution, happened in specific geographies like China for the chips or California for software, because specifically for chips, for example, it was constrained to a specific feedstock or raw material. You need rare earths to create chips or batteries or whatever. So that's why these revolutions happen in specific geographies. But biology is not constrained to specific raw materials or feedstocks. As I was saying, it's very versatile. It likes to eat all sorts of things. So because of this versatility, biology cannot be confined to specific geographies. It will happen all over the planet at once in parallel. And that's the only way to actually do it fast enough to change our society and our economy so that it becomes circular and sustainable before we collapse our planet. And I think that definitely will happen. And the other question regarding the relationship between big cities and small cities, I think cities in the future, as a sense, the concept of a city will drastically change. Just for example, the announcement they did of the line, this new city that Saudi Arabia wants to create that is significantly smaller in area. And this concept of new cities need to incorporate or will be dependent completely on biotechnology, because the only way is to recreate planet Earth in a city. That's what you need to do. In order to do that, you need to cycle everything: nitrogen, carbon, water, clean the water with plants, with microorganisms, with bacteria, cycle nitrogen with bacteria, create all these systems that will, as I said, recreate the systems that occur planetarily into a city so that it is net zero, it is sustainable, and it creates all the resources it needs and consumes. This will also open the door to actually living in other planets, because the only way to colonize Mars and other planets is create this system of a city that works by itself, that doesn't rely on anybody else. Ultra locality, to make it local, right? Everything needs to be local. And in order to do that, everything matches up, right? So if we create this new concept of a city that is sustainable, the only way to do it is with genetic engineering, with biology. And if we do that, we can save our planet and at the same time create the technology and the engineering needed to colonize other planets and create cities in other planets. So I think this will be linked together. It will be in parallel, as I said. It will happen, I think, all over the place. And I think this is great because different people from different cultures and different backgrounds have different approaches to things, and both can be valuable and valid. And they can even create a better perspective because it has more sides to it. And the problem we face as humanity is so big that this is the only way to solve it, if we all work together in parallel at once to solve this problem.
That was a great interview. What do you think?
Axel is 100% visionary. He is the CEO. I see why. This guy was raised to be CEO of this company. Can't describe it any other way. The way he sees the world to be more sustainable, be more efficient rather than wasteful. Just really inspired by how he created his company, how he created his manufacturing. And I think more companies that manufacture need to hear this episode to understand the way that Axel thinks and to try to make their operations more efficient and sustainable.
Yeah, I agree. I had met Axel very serendipitously. I felt like we were meant to be in each other's lives through a business coach I had hired many years ago. And when I first met them, they were already talking about scale, even though they were still at the lab bench. And their focus on scale, I think, is really what's going to help them win or be a winner in this alternative leather space, because their whole thing, as he says, is making an impact. And the only way you can make an impact on a material like leather is if you're thinking scale. It's not enough to just be, hey, we've produced great material. You have to be able to scale production, and you have to be able to do hundreds of thousands of millions of square feet per year. And their facility in Mexico is going to be able to do 1 million square feet of the leather by the end of 2023. They're already producing these very large sheets. So it's a fascinating story, and I hope people enjoy it as much as we did doing the interview.
Alexis came to New York and we had dinner with him. He shared samples of their leather and it was beautiful. Like, it was definitely luxury, high quality, firm leather. And the pattern on the leather, or at least this one sheet Alexis shared, it had this crazy like organic pattern, which was designed by the microbes themselves. So this is luxury quality kicked up a notch, right? It's very unique. It's created in a moment in time by these microbes. And I could see that this can create an additional value to this leather. People need to pay attention to Polybion, make sure that they know what companies that they end up working with. So I know that they're talking to a lot of big brands. So keep an eye on where Polybion is going to be selling their product. So I'm very excited to at least own a Polybion leather something, whether it's shoes or a purse. Sign me up.
They've given me a very early prototype of their leather as a wallet. And they know that I always carry them around with me. They're always in my backpack or in my pocket because I love showing them off to people, because I think it makes what we do and what we talk about very real. So if you run into me someplace and you want to see what their product looks like, I definitely have samples. But I think one thing that's always worth letting our listeners know is that we do have transcripts of all these interviews. They're available in the show notes. There should be a link to the Polybion website. You should definitely go on there. There's a lot of great pictures of what their facility looks like. And if you have any comments on this podcast, this particular episode, we'd love to get your comments. Please go on the Grow Everything site and leave us a message. And
I can't wait to hear more about Polybion in our next episode with Alexis.
Yeah, that'll be a great episode. Okay, I'll see you later, Erum.
See ya. Bye-bye.